Okay, guys. For the shells, we're going to keep them fairly light. Most of them are lighter. But even if it's like a light medium value, you're probably still going to just use yellow wooden pencil. So even remember for really light flowers, so light yellow, light pink, white flowers, you're still going to use yellow wooden pencil. So up top we're going to say yellow pencil. So we're going to look for the curvature of the lines on the shell. That's what's going to make it look rounded. And some of the lines are more obvious than others. Depends on how old that shell is. And we're going to add layers and lines in the direction they go, or the direction they are in. So what does that look like? I'm going to show you guys two different shells at the same time. Okay. So if you have the type of shell that just has the curved, like kind of offset horizontal curves, then you really want to make sure it's curved on the outside, and then I kind of just connect in the inside. So I am looking for, so in the light, and if it's really faint, that means it's an old shell. The lines were sanded off literally by the sand of the shell, kind of like being washed up on shore for years and years and years and years. So if you can barely see them, we're going to fake it a little bit and make them a little more obvious, because it's the lines that makes that shell look rounded. And so then I would look at, is there a side of the shell or an area of the shell that's darker? And so for me, on the right-hand side, it's a little bit darker. So I'm going to add another layer to the right-hand side. Or for you, maybe the top of the shell is darker. So wherever it's darker, you're going to add a few extra lines, kind of fading in. And then you might have some dark streaks. So for this one at the bottom, it has like a little touch of purple in it. And then for some of you, for that kind of shell, if you have a newer shell, it will have the vertical little ridges as well. I wonder if you guys can see this on mine. Okay, yeah. Kind of. You can kind of see these lines that come down. So this is like a little bit of a newer shell. I can actually feel the texture on it. So if you do have that, then yes, you would add those too. So I am going to add, it's called curved hatching, where it's curved lines that go in the same direction. And so you're going to look at the curvature of those. It should be almost straight in the middle, and as it gets to the edges, they curve out more. But notice how I'm still staying like really light because it is a white shell. If you have this kind of shell where it has the ridges, I don't know, like your classic kind of stereotypical shell like this one, the first thing you would want to do is you're going to refine your edges. So I'm looking for the scalloped edge, or the edge where it curves, like right there, all those little curvatures, because then the lines line up where the little indentations are at the bottom. So I drew them initially, but if you didn't, and it's just like a straight, no, not straight, sorry, just a curved rounded line with no indentations, add the indentations. And then I would look for how do they curve, like looking at where it curves the most. So I'd say this is the line that kind of curves the most to the back. And then they start kind of like sinking into each other. So those are the indentations in the ridges. Okay. So I would also do a little bit of a layer. So I did some layers on this one. So wherever it's darkest, so mine's a little bit darker more at the top of it. So I'm going to add a little extra at the top. And then that will create shadow at the top. Okay, then for your notes, you're going to blend with the direction. So similar to the piece of wood yesterday where you're blending with the line direction, you're going to blend with the direction of the lines. And you want to do this on padding because it's like, usually it's a softer texture than the piece of wood, obviously. Even though it's kind of liney and you might be able to feel texture, it's much softer. All right, so for this kind, and then also if it's a really light shell, now that your blender is getting kind of dirty, You might want to clean it off. I kind of just twist it and scrub it onto the newspaper a little bit. So you might want to clean off your blender. Okay. I'm blending in direction of line. And I'm trying to get along the edges pretty good so I don't have to go back and refine. I'm trying to blend in. I have like a darker edge at the bottom, trying to blend that in. And if there's still some white left, that's okay. For this one, same thing. I'm going to blend in the direction of the line. And for this type of shell, I would then blend over it to gray it down. But blend over the lines first. So you're softening them so it looks like an indentation in the shell and not just a line like thrown on there. Gives it a little bit of depth and dimension. Getting my edges. Okay. So blend in direction. All right, then for your, oh, that's not yours, sorry. Then we're going to erase out highlights, and for the second shell, the ridges, the top, like where it kind of curves up slightly. So we're going to add plus ridges. Then I'm going to erase out the texture of the lines, kind of bring back some of the whiteness of the shell. And we're going to add another layer of lines again. And then we'll erase again. So you only blend like the first time. Okay. So I personally would either use mechanical pencil eraser, or you can trade your ID for the pencil top eraser with the paintbrush on the end. And I would still erase on padding because you still want your lines to be a little bit soft looking. And I would erase a little bit more where the light is coming from. So light's coming from the left-hand side mostly for me. So I'm going to erase out more on the left. And then a little bit on the right. And I'm looking for where's it also the light is, kind of in the center a little. So for this type of shell, I would erase out where the ridges are. So the tops of, and I'm kind of flicking it up into the darker part, like keeping this area a little bit darker, or whatever area is a little bit darker for you. All right, then we're going to add another layer of line. So I'm coming back and I'm really looking again. Oh, sorry, this one had some vertical. Looking again at where is it the darkest, or if there's any dark rings or layers of the shell. It's like tree rings for a shell, essentially. Growth rings. Wonder where that got a little bit dark. I'm going to add a little bit more on the darker side, a little bit more on the edge just in general to make it look curved. And then I'm going to erase back out. So you're like adding and subtracting. And if you have some vertical lines, you can erase those out too. And I always come back and do the curved ones again. And that's pretty much it. It's going to stay really, really light, barely any detail. Okay, so for this one, I would kind of redefine, especially where it's darker. So add another layer where it's darker. And there might be a little bit of a shadow between that little piece that kind of sticks out a little bit. If you need to blend again, like this one might actually need a little bit more blending so it looks less striped and more dimensional looking at the top. Okay, then for this one also, if there is any details, so some of these shells that are newer looking, or less old, I guess, newer, younger, they might have some like little rings that you can see like the growth rings, and you want to curve those like parentheses. So you might be able to actually see some detail on those. If not, obviously don't add it. But if you can see it, here, let me just add a little bit so you guys can see how that would look. It generally becomes like less obvious the further away from the bottom. So if you can see little rings, blend those. I'm just going to touch blend over them. And then you would still go back and erase out highlight. Actually, let me use this one. Because you want the ridges to look like they're curving up and then sinking in. If you have a different shell, because this is the majority of what you guys have, if you have a different shell than that, I'll come around individually and talk to you today. But you just want to make sure that you're layering and then erasing out and layering and erasing out, because you want to pull back out the value so it stays really light, because generally they're like one of the lightest things in your whole entire still life.